truthful explanation on the issues which shape the news. This is actually where we break down the biggest stories with the sharpest mind, where real conversation takes place with domain experts on topics which make the headlines, even as we speak now. I'm Manas Srivastav. Today is Explained Live. We are going to discuss an issue which is making the headlines and impacting the world. And I'm talking about the war in the Middle East. So, where is it heading and what happens now? In the minds of a lot of readers and viewers, questions are coming up. What's happening in Iran? What's the position of US and Israel? And especially India's position and war's impact on India's economy, diaspora, etc. We're going to explain a lot of these questions. Our expert today is, dear viewers, is Mr. Navdeep Suri. Sir is the former Indian ambassador to UAE and Egypt. Welcome, sir.
Thank
And
you.
in conversation with him is Shubhajit Roy. Shubhajit is the diplomatic editor at the Indian Express. Before I ask Shubhajit to take it forward, here's something for the viewers. So the conversation between our editor and the guest will take place, and you can ask questions. You can type in the chat box and we'll pick up questions from there towards the end. We also have some of the questions from our registered users beforehand. Please make sure that this conversation, this rich conversation which is going to happen, may include a lot of questions and doubts which you intend to ask towards the end. So stay tuned. So let's dive into this important explanatory live and understand the issue. Shubhajit, over to you.
Thank you, Manas, for the introducing the topic and the speaker. I have to say that first, welcome Ambassador Suri. Mr. Suri, I've had the privilege of knowing him for the last almost 2 decades now. And, he is one of the finest minds on West Asia, having studied Arabic in his early years of the career and has spent a considerable time in the region. Obviously, his glorious assignments as ambassador to Egypt and UAE are mostly remembered. But he's also done several other very important postings, including in Australia and other places as well. Mr. Suri is here because he is a repeat guest at the Explained Live session. We had the privilege of having him as our guest speaker in December 2023, just 2 months after the war in Gaza broke out. And he had explained very beautifully at that point of time the complexity, the nuances of the situation back then. And as I was listening to it, last night, going through that particular video, I saw some of his observations were so prescient that 2.5 years later, they are absolutely bang on. Ms. Suri, thank you so much for taking out the time and to be with us during this very, very volatile, turbulent time in the world. A war in the region, which has global consequences, has been on now for 20 days now. And it has obviously dominated the global headlines since US and Israel launched strikes on Iran on February 28th. And Tehran, as expected, counter-attacked Israel. And to some people's surprise, but not many of us who watched Tehran closely, not to our surprise, that it attacked the US bases, facilities, and personnel in the region, along in the Gulf, the Arab countries in the Gulf. It has meant a lot of casualties on either side, both in Iran. Obviously, the damage in Iran is much higher in terms of lives lost, as well as the infrastructure that has been decimated. Also, the kind of the leadership level impact that has, deaths that have happened from the supreme leader Ali Khamenei to the National Security Advisor, who was Ali Larijani, who was practically running the country over the last 2 weeks or more, and the senior leadership in the military, in IRGC, in the clergy. And it has also, what it has done is, it has also impacted the global economy because of the attacks on the oil and gas installations, as well as the shipping containers. And that has led to a sort of a fear of threat of a recession or a global slowdown if this war continues. So we'll also touch some of those topics. And the main protagonist in this particular saga, in this episode, has been US President Donald Trump, who has given mixed signals about the longevity of the war. About a week, 10 days back, he started saying that he has almost destroyed Iran, he has almost ended the war, he's almost achieved the objectives, but we are yet to see a call for a ceasefire, and the war has dragged on, as I said, for 20 days now. So there are, as Manas said, there are many questions on top of the mind. So I will jump straight into the subject, Mr. Suri. If you could take us to the rationale of US and Israel rationale to attack Iran at the first place.
Well, thanks, Shubhajit, for your generous introduction, your very extensive opening remarks, and it's a pleasure to be back on this Press Explained Live. Let me say upfront that the attacks launched by Israel and the US on the 28th of February are completely illegal. There is no sanctity in international law. There is no UN Security Council resolution. And apart from being illegal, it was also probably the wrong thing to do at a time when United States was engaged in substantive negotiations with Iran, brokered by Oman, taking place in Muscat. And you had these statements coming from both Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner as late as 25th of February, saying we are making excellent progress. There was a new round expected to take place. On the 26th of February, I think the Omani foreign minister got a sense that something was amiss, because the Americans had been bringing their naval assets into the proximity of the Gulf. And he made a dash to Washington to see who he could meet and persuade that we are very close to a deal. He met the vice president once. He could not meet Trump, but he then did the extraordinary thing. Extraordinary because the Omanis are very careful, very discreet, very low-profile mediators. They are never the kind of country that is looking for glory or high profile for themselves. And this has been their track record over the decades. But for the foreign minister, Badr al-Busaidi, to go on CBS and to say that we are so close to a deal, that the Iranians have agreed to something that they had never previously agreed, not even during the Obama period nuclear agreement, which was that they would not stockpile any uranium, and any enriched uranium, and that give diplomacy a chance. And yet, despite that desperate last-minute plea, on the 28th of February, you had the attack carried out by Israel. Let's look at the background. Since 1979, when the Islamic Revolutionary Government came into power, they have made it a point to say that they do not recognize Israel. they call it the Zionist entity. They do not even call it Israel.
Correct. Zionist regime or Zionist entity. Yeah.
Right. They actively decry Arab states that have made peace with Israel, be it Egypt, be it Jordan, be it UAE or Bahrain, or the others. They formed an axis of resistance by supporting groups like Hezbollah, like Hamas, like others, like the Houthis, who could continue to resist against Israel and its occupation. And at this point, I'm not going into the moral or immoral nature of the occupation, but just to say that Iran stood out as the steadfast defender of the Palestinian cause. It became an ideological issue for them, and they were willing to put their money where their mouth is, and they were willing to sort of show to the Arabs that we are more pro-Palestinian than you are. And it became a part of their whole ideology. With that kind of Iran, when it starts developing a nuclear program, Israel says that this is an existential threat for me. I cannot allow this country to have a nuclear weapons program, at least. Right. Iran kept saying, as a peaceful nuclear program, there were few buyers for that particular line of argument. And what you saw from the 1990s, when these reports started becoming public, was quite an extraordinary series of, you could almost call them intelligence coups by Mossad from Israel. They managed to infiltrate the supply chains from where Iran was procuring weapons, or the components for its nuclear program, sorry. They knew that Iran had used A.Q. Khan, the Pakistani scientist's designs, which were themselves of Dutch origin. So they managed to infiltrate Dutch supply chains and actually send defective parts into the nuclear program. You might remember that infamous case of 2010 when they planted a virus called Stuxnet into the Siemens controllers for the centrifuges at the Natanz plant. And what it did was it made those centrifuges run super fast and burn themselves out. And there were a whole range of these episodes of cyber warfare and supply chain interdiction, with which they kept setting back the nuclear program. But then somebody said, look, each time you do this, it sets the Iranians back by 6 months or 8 months, and they come back with renewed vigor.
Right.
And then Israel started something very different. They started assassinating some of the top scientists. They said that the human capital will take decades to be built, the human knowledge that has been acquired by some of the top scientists. And so you had, again, this extraordinary set of assassinations, one after the other. And one of the Mossad chiefs, when he was asked, are you behind it? And he simply smiled and said, these are divine interventions. Mossad consistently kept saying that this is the better way to stop Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon state. But you had a second channel in Israel, which was Netanyahu and other hardliners. And as early as 1992, Shubhajit, when Netanyahu was a young member of the Knesset, in one of his early speeches in the Knesset in 1992, he said that Iran is just 3 years away from having a nuclear weapon, and we need to do something now. And after that, if you look at a pattern, 4 years later, 96, he goes to, he's now become the prime minister, and he goes to address the US Congress, a joint session of the US Congress in 1996, exactly 30 years ago.
Right.
And he says, time is running out. United States, you got to do something now to stop Iran's nuclear program. In 2009, he goes back to the US Congress and says Iran is barely a year or year and a half away from making a nuclear device. In 2012, I don't know if you remember, but he went to UN General Assembly and brandished this weird-looking cartoon, and again said that by next spring, Iran will have a nuclear weapon if you don't do anything. when the nuclear deal was signed during the Obama administration, again, you had this unbelievable scenario of an Israeli prime minister going to the US Congress, using the Israeli lobbying in Washington to address the Congress to oppose an agreement that the president of the United States was supporting. Right? And so it brings you logically down to last year when you had Operation Midnight Hammer, because Netanyahu was finally able to convince President Trump that, having first convinced President Trump to tear up the nuclear agreement in 2018 during his first term, or withdraw the United States from the nuclear agreement that the United States had itself led, he was able to convince President Trump that the Iranians are on the verge of a nuclear device. And that led to Operation Midnight Hammer in June last year. And having announced that the Iranian nuclear program was obliterated, they again started making the same noise this January 2026, saying that it is imminent, within weeks. It's a matter of weeks that Iran will have a nuclear device. So we need to do something now. Right. So if you were looking to construct a rationale, what it demonstrates is that despite all the successes of Mossad, eventually Netanyahu and the hardliners managed to prevail over the gradualists, if you might call it that, who said that we can prevent the program, don't get into a conflict which will have unforeseen consequences. And I guess that's where you find yourself today.
Right, right. Very, very aptly put. And I want to just add to some of the observations you made that, I had conversations with Iranian diplomats after the war started on February 28th. And one of the things that they told me was that, our teams, the Iranian teams, which were negotiating, were comprised of all the technical experts at our level, the best nuclear negotiators, the best technical experts who understood the subject about enrichment and the reactors and the facilities. On the American side, they said there was only Jared Kushner, the President Trump's son-in-law, and Steve Witkoff, who is his envoy for everything. So I think that for the first time showed them that they basically made the assessment that the Americans were possibly not serious. They were stringing them along. And as you rightly pointed out, the Oman foreign minister, when he said that in an interview that there was a deal within reach, and the Iranians confirmed that to me, that the deal was indeed within reach and committed on Friday, February 27th. It was, and on the next, they said that let's put it in writing. The Americans apparently told the Iranians at that point of time, that we will meet in Vienna and we will have an exchange of a paper. And that is what was the understanding was, but on Saturday, the attacks happened. So you kind of laid that out in your sort of opening remarks.
Yeah. Shubhajit, just to add, as a very perceptive friend of mine told me that neither Netanyahu nor Trump were prepared to take yes for an answer.
Right, right. Very well said. Mr. Suri, I want to press you on this history of animosity between Israel and Iran, and also US and Iran, but first Israel and Iran. If you could, ever since the revolution in 1979, there has been sort of that history has been there in terms of attacks on each other, on sort of targeted assassinations, and which has led to this point where, and the US has been involved, but it did not get into the point of intervention, military intervention in Iran directly, till President Trump took the call last year. You give us a sense of this change that has happened in the context of this history of animosity?
Shubhajit, I'm in the middle of this reading this book called Target Tehran that two Israeli journalists have written about the sustained attempt to undermine and bring down Iran's nuclear program. And as I said, from the Israeli political right wing, most notably Netanyahu, but also others, there has been no dearth of attempts to persuade the Americans to come along. I think until Trump became president, particularly Trump 2.0, the conventional wisdom in Washington was that this is a bad idea to strike at Iran. And that's why the nuclear deal that was worked out so diligently, not just by the United States, but by the P5 plus Germany, as the six major countries, was at that time seen as a big step forward in diffusing the tensions and in putting a diplomatic cap on Iran's nuclear ambitions. From the Israeli part, actually is easy to understand. Given the background of the Holocaust, given the circumstances in which Israel came into existence, the perceptions of unending hostility from Arab countries, and now this Islamic revolution and a large country, and particularly the changeover that happened from the time that you had the Shah of Iran, who was very friendly towards Israel, to the abrupt change that took place in 1979. So, the change on the Israeli side is easy to understand. I think the US position is actually more nuanced because it kind of takes you back to 1951 when Mohammad Mossadegh became a democratically elected, somewhat left-of-center prime minister of Iran. I think the effort at that time was to reduce the monarchy to a constitutional position.
Right.
And one of the early things that he campaigned on and executed was that the petroleum royalty agreement that they had with Anglo-British were extremely one-sided.
Right.
And it was actually, when you look at the petroleum history of that era, it was almost like the majority of royalties go to the Brits, and the costs can be inflated in any which way. So you had the spectacle of the British engineers and expats living a royal lifestyle in Iran, while the Iranians were almost like slave labor.
Right.
And Mossadegh promised to fix it. This was clearly not acceptable to the Brits in 1951. It was not acceptable to the Americans. In 1953, they combined, the Brits and the Americans, on what is known as Operation Ajax, to bring down Mossadegh and to bring back the Shah as an absolute ruler. And so you had, from 53 onwards, this exceptional honeymoon between the Shah of Iran and the Americans on one hand, and the Western world and Israel on the other. But among the things that Shah was doing was also a headlong rush into westernization. And you could see that in a conservative society, there was a discomfort and a backlash building up. And so that eventually led to Ayatollah Khomeini coming from Paris from his exile and having this popular revolution to overthrow the Shah. And not only was the new regime that came into power reflexively anti-American, but you had that within weeks you had that hostage crisis when the mob of students took over the U.S. embassy in Tehran and took 52 American embassy personnel as hostage. And that lasted for a very long time. So you can see that from that point onwards, it was downhill in terms of relations between Iran and the United States. And so I think it was Bush who put, after 9/11, he put Iran as one of the members of the axis of evil. And for the Iranians, America was the great Satan. That's how the relationship between the two sides you could see deteriorating over the years.
Right. And in this point of time, last year when President Trump attacked, that for the first time showed how they could, Iran, which had such a robust nuclear program, it had built its ballistic missile capabilities, but it had the Americans and the Israelis had a free run on their airspace. So essentially, the conventional capability was pretty weak for Iran, which had built its nuclear program with a lot of effort and expertise and material from, as you said in your earlier, from different sources. This assessment that Iran was a weak player in terms of defending its assets, defending. How much do you think that shaped in influencing the decision, in coming to this decision that today or on February 28th, the Americans finally decided to launch the attack against Iran? You think that set the stage?
You know, I think the attack itself was being telegraphed by the Americans and the Israelis for weeks, right? It took several weeks for the naval assets to come into place. Now, you could say that 28th February itself was a question of timing, that it was an opportunistic attack because the Israelis got intelligence and the Americans got intelligence that Khamenei was meeting with all these senior people, and this is, at one stroke you can take them out. But despite the tactical successes that Israel and the US have achieved through these, and their legitimate perception, after all, Iran till last month was still flying 1960s or 70s vintage F-14 Tomcats and some odd Sukhois, and had not really had a modern aircraft for 50 years. When you compare them with the fifth generation F-35s and F-16s and so on, the mismatch is enormous. It isn't even a contest.
Correct.
And I think the Iranians understood that. The Americans also understood that, but the Iranians started figuring out ways to deal with that asymmetry. That when it comes to conventional power, when it comes to intelligence, when it comes to air dominance, there is no contest.
Correct.
But there are other things that the Iranians can do, and I think they learned plenty of lessons, both from, let's not forget June 2024 when Israel had hit Iran.
Right.
And then June 2025 when Israel and the United States jointly hit Iran in Midnight Hammer. I think the Iranians had enough time to internalize the lessons and craft their strategies to counter and strategies that would play to their strengths, and also target the weaknesses of the other side. And I keep saying that, you may not like the Iranian regime. You may say these are medieval mullahs or whatever, as the perception goes. But being undesirable or unlikable does not mean they're stupid. There are some very, very smart people with, again, 7,000 years of history and a civilization behind them, and a genuine quest for knowledge of science, which enables them to do what they are doing today. And I think it is the hubris of the Americans and the Israelis. They thought that they could have a quick victory. At least the Americans probably thought that they could have a quick victory. Perhaps the whole Venezuela experience had emboldened them to think of a quick victory. But I think, Shubhajit, this is where it's important to spend maybe a minute or two on the differing objectives of Israel and the United States.
Yeah, please.
Vis-a-vis Iran.
What are the objectives? I mean, I'm curious.
This is a good point. And as good, I think the Israelis or at least the government of Israel led by Netanyahu, let's not forget that there's an active and vigorous opposition in Israel as well to this. But at least the government and Netanyahu himself, as I told you, since 1992, he has been talking about bringing an end to this regime in Iran. He said very openly in a public address that for 40 years he has dreamed of an Iran which is not ruled by the by the Revolutionary Guards and by the government that you have in place. And so regime change is a very clear objective for Israel. The nuclear was a handy facade to have, but each time you were coming to a nuclear agreement, Israel was led the opposition to it. Israel does not want a nuclear agreement. And I think that that's a crucial point to understand. That is why Israel so aggressively opposed the JCPOA or the nuclear deal during the Obama administration in 2015, right? From the American side, I think they did not see it quite that way. For them, the nuclear agreement was important. To have an Iran that did not pursue a nuclear weapons program was important. But with President Trump and his constant shifting of positions and his verbosity and his tendency to communicate via social media posts, I think it leaves everybody scrambling to find post-facto explanations. I mean, put yourself in the shoes of a Rubio or a US ambassador or somebody who is now trying to explain to interlocutors what did Trump mean then and what does he mean now. But I think the mainstream American opinion, and I say that carefully, would, at least in the strategic community, would have said that we want to deny Iran the possibility of nuclear weapons, but we do not want the destruction of Iran as a state.
Right.
We are concerned about the day after consequences. And that is why the regime change may be a desirable thing, but for them, a Venezuela model of the regime staying with a different leader after decapitating the head was a preferred option.
Right.
And the reason is the fear of the unknown, of having seen what happened in Iraq, where Saddam was removed, Baath Party was dismantled, and in the vacuum, it gave the birth to ISIS and all of the other terror groups. Or Libya, where Gaddafi was removed, and you still have that country divided. And not only divided, but the absence of government meant that Libya became a gateway for weapons and ammunition and everything to all the Islamist groups in the Sahel, destabilizing Burkina and Niger and northern Nigeria and all of that area. So I think the Americans understand. The Israelis are okay with chaos. They are okay with fragmentation of Iran. They are quite okay with, a no state situation or a no government situation, but the Americans are not. And I think that's where the divergence is. And you might see some of those differences come up even more significantly as we go along.
Right. At this point, in fact, since we are talking about situation in a country, so I want to go into situation in Iran. After the killing of the of Supreme Leader Khamenei, NSA Ali Larijani, the top military leaders and intelligence leaders in the Iranian regime, in the Iranian government. What does that mean for Iran? If you could give us a sense of that.
So I think, Shubhajit, at one level, you have to admire the kind of intelligence that Israel possesses, the degree of infiltration or penetration of Iranian society that enables them to do the kind of precision targeting that they've been able to do to take out so many of the top leaders of the Iranian government. Having said that, the Iranians seem to have been better prepared. And whatever you see coming out of Tehran is that Khamenei had instructed for 4 levels of succession to be programmed for each part of government and the IRGC. And I think you're beginning to see that within 24 hours of Khamenei and his top team being killed, you had a collective leadership takeover. Khamenei himself has been replaced by his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, as the supreme leader. The IRGC seems to be managing without the top ranks. But I think this has possibly negative connotations that at 2 levels. One, the people who are coming in may be even more hardline. And even more defiant against making an agreement or a negotiated settlement. Second, to the extent that people like Larijani were experienced negotiators in Vienna, in other places, I think that lack of experienced negotiators who were pragmatic, they may have been hardline, but they were pragmatic, might make it even harder to arrive at a negotiated settlement tomorrow. The third point I want to make is that I think there is this expectation that Netanyahu has been frequently talking up. I think he has done it in 3 times in the last 15 days in his public statements, urging the Iranian people to rise. Yes. Most recently, I think day before yesterday, after killing Larijani. And I think there is a miscalculation there. The miscalculation is you think that because I oppose Khamenei's regime, I will support Israel. It's not a binary.
Right.
I most probably hate the Khamenei regime and the Israeli actions with equal passion. And what the bombing, and it has been pretty severe, and the damage to cultural institutions like the Gulistan Palace or the mosque in Isfahan or other places does, is a lot of people will start rallying behind the flag. They will say, for the time being, let me set aside my differences with the government in Tehran. Let me first oppose the foreign enemy. That's one aspect. The second aspect of this miscalculation is the attack on places like the oil refinery outside Tehran and the damage that we saw it cause, with black rain coming down and all of that. I think the Iranians, and I'm talking about those who don't like the government, and that's a large number in Iran, also are smart enough to have seen the examples in Iraq that even a bad government is better than no government. And you don't want to end up in that situation of no government. And finally, when you look at the map of Iran today, that's more or less existed in this format, at least since the Safavids in the 16th century. So you've had a 500-year continuity of this geographical and national entity called Persia/Iran. Today, for people like Trump or others to wantonly say, oh, we may end up with a different map of Iran, generates a lot of fear. So people who are okay with the downfall of the regime doesn't mean that they are okay with the destruction of the state of Iran. And I think those are some of the elements at work in Iran. And that's why I think, and one final point is, I think the brutality with which the January uprising was suppressed by the Basij and by the IRGC in Iran, I think any sensible guy on the street knows that the guns are still with the other guys. And they have made it very clear that any protest at this stage, when the country is in the midst of a war, will be seen as an act of treason. And so, today in Iran, even though you've had the decapitation, you have a functioning government. You see that on the streets. You see that it's working, and I think the projections of people uprising, rising against the government or the demise of the regime are definitely premature, if not inaccurate.
Right, right, right. Very well put. In fact, just to add to your points, one is obviously you mentioned about that each Khamenei during his time, he asked each, say, a section head or a leader in the regime to name next four of his successors in the hierarchy, which sort of made continuity in terms of functioning possible even after decapitating or assassination of the leaders. And second is the mosaic strategy, where it is decentralized at 31 units, each with independent, autonomous standing orders, and knowing very fully well what to attack, how to attack, what is the jurisdiction, what do they have, and till they get word that from the central command that to stop. And I think that these two elements have put the regime in shape, in place. And the second point about the people, one piece that I read was very revelatory, was that people may still hate the regime in Iran, in the streets of Iran, but they're still queuing up to donate their blood at the blood donation camps for the victims or for people who have suffered damage because of the bombings, because of those attacks by US and Israel. So that sort of tells you the complexity and the nuanced understanding one needs to sort of understand the Iranians. We've had an opportunity to understand from you about Iran. Because you were positioned in UAE and you've seen it from outside Iran, placed in the Gulf. Uh, I want to understand from you Iran's response to these American facilities, bases, personnel in UAE, where you were the ambassador, or say, or Saudi Arabia, Oman, Kuwait, Qatar. How does the region see Iran's response?
I think with a great deal of dismay. And the reason is, if you look at the 6 GCC member states, Oman and Qatar had traditionally enjoyed very close relations with Iran. Oman was, of course, negotiating and has always had a good relationship. Qatar, by virtue of the fact that it shares the world's largest gas field with Iran, so it's and otherwise also has had very close ties. The Saudis and the Emiratis in the last 5 years had made a conscious effort towards a rapprochement with Iran. In 2019, 2020, you had that famous China brokered, which was actually Oman brokered, but China took a lot of the credit for it, peace agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. The Emiratis were also back in terms of managing their relationship. So there's a great deal of dismay that, look, all of the progress that we made to build relations are telling the Americans that we are opposed to this war, are telling the Americans that we will not allow your bases to be used for this aggression against Iran, etc., came to naught. So, UAE in particular, because you mentioned it, I think has been singled out for special affection. The data shows that Iran has fired more missiles, drones, etc., at UAE than against Israel and all the other GCC countries put together. The Emiratis' air defenses have been remarkably successful. Initially they were claiming a 92% success rate against the incoming projectiles. And when you look at the number of projectiles fired at them and the relatively contained damage, you can see that they've been fairly successful. They've also gone out of their way to assure the expat communities. And it is an unusual country because in a country of 11 million, there are only 1 million Emiratis. The remaining 10 million are expats, of which 4.3 million are Indian. So we have 40% of that country's population. So it really has a special position for us. And I speak to a lot of my friends in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai, in Sharjah, and they say that they have no plans to leave. They feel that despite the stress of these constant missiles and the interceptions and the noise and the debris, that they are being very well looked after by the government. The fact that President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed personally went to a hospital, met some of the injured people, expats, I think was again one of those symbolic gestures that mattered. But going beyond that, I think they were targeted for two reasons. One, because they were the most forward looking in terms of the Abraham Accords and the ones that had the closest relationship with Israel since the Abraham Accords. And second, I think because they had established such a successful business model or economic model, a country which welcomes expatriates from all over the world, 200 nationalities, at a time when much of the world is saying no to immigration. And Dubai itself as the entrepot was kind of the symbol. So what better than to, if you wanted to make a disproportionate impact, than to strike at Dubai, at Dubai Airport, at Jebel Ali Port, which are the engines of the prosperity of Dubai. And because everybody knows somebody in Dubai today, it creates that larger sort of perception that Dubai is not safe. But today, when you start talking to Emiratis and to the Saudis and to the others, I think you see a genuine dilemma, Shubhajit. The dilemma is, are we better off with a belligerent Israel that seems to be very intent on remaking the whole Middle East after its own desires? Or with an unpredictable Iran that will lash out at us despite the fact that we have not done anything to hurt it?
Right.
And I think people are grappling with those choices. Just to give you one instance, and again, I'm quoting Badr al-Busaidi, who made this very public statement, where he said that the actual goal of the war is to weaken Iran, reshape the region, and push forward the normalization file within a broader context that also involves attempts to prevent the establishment of the Palestinian state, and to weaken every state or institution that stands alongside the project to establish the Palestinian state. So, he's putting himself out that we see this game. So in the Gulf countries today, you really see that what is the best approach for us? They've said we reserve the right to respond to the aggression, but none of them has up till now, because they also realize the Americans' unpredictability. Tomorrow, Trump says, end of the war, I'm going away, thank you very much, I've won the war. And they are left next to a wounded and angry neighbor.
Right.
They still have to, geography is pretty unforgiving that way. And so I think those are the dilemmas that they're wrestling with.
Right. Let me come to the Strait of Hormuz and its impact, because that impacts India, and then I will take you to the India question. But the Strait of Hormuz is sort of, as we know, is sort of about 1/5 of the world's oil and gas supply, energy supply goes through that particular channel. It's a narrow strait. Iran, with its asymmetrical power, has managed to choke the supply there. That has obviously led to a rise in oil and gas prices. We're in the throes of a crisis or on the verge of a crisis in terms of gas supply. It has literally reached the kitchen in India. And so I want you to spend some time and tell us, because you were in UAE, which is also dependent on the strait for its exports to the world. So, how do you see this energy security element playing out with the Strait of Hormuz being choked?
And I remember, Shubhajit, when we spoke in December 23, and we had spoken about the risk of a regional war.
Yeah.
I think I was saying that this
Yeah.
is one of our nightmare scenarios.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, today, that's where we seem to be heading. As of now, I think for India specifically, the gas position is going to be far more severe than crude oil. Not only do we have some crude oil reserves, but there's enough floating around, and so the shortages may not become that imminent of crude. But if you look at the events of the last 24 hours, where Israel first struck at the Iranian section of the Pars gas field, the South Pars, and then Iran retaliated as it had said it would if its energy infrastructure was struck. It hit at the Ras Laffan in infrastructure in Qatar, and it's also struck in Saudi Arabia and UAE. Now, partly, if I just go back for a second, I think what you see is a conscious attempt by Israel to draw the other Arab states into the conflict. And up till now, they are resisting. But Israel does not want this conflict to be remembered as Israel's war.
Right.
And it's afraid that in the US, it will get branded as Israel's war. So I just wanted to park that thought with you. I think the fact that Qatar is the world's largest gas producer, 20% of the world's gas comes from that area. And now that you're talking about serious damage to some of the installations, the reason why, even if the war ends tomorrow, this is going to have far-reaching consequences is because, as you know, to transport gas, it is first liquefied.
Right.
And it is liquefied at minus 160 degrees centigrade. And then that liquid is put into those container vessels, the liquefied specialized container ships, and transported and then regasified at the other end.
Right.
But once the facilities have been shut down in Qatar, which they have, it takes days, possibly weeks, to get them back to full operational capacity. And so even if the war ends tomorrow, you're looking at several weeks further going down the road of shortages. For us, its first and foremost impact is on fertilizers,
Right.
Which use LNG as a feedstock. And you know, the sowing season is coming up, and you will see the government really struggling to meet the fertilizer requirements of the farmers. And the increase in prices of gas, wherever we are getting from. Today, you have a situation where India is being outbid by the Koreans and the Taiwanese and the Japanese for the same pool of gas that's available.
Yeah.
Right? So because of the supply and demand situation. So you are inevitably looking at higher fertilizer prices or much higher subsidies from government, which will impact our fiscal deficit. Oil prices already touching $120 per barrel today from 68, 69. So let's say they've gone up by $50 per barrel. $1 increase means $1.5 billion extra in India's import bill.
About
50 means $75 billion already added to our import bill just for that one item. Think of how much you'll have to export to cover that current account deficit. So you will continue then to see pressure on the rupee. You will continue to see inflationary pressures because oil is such a basic requirement that the increase in oil prices will feed into everything else. Industries ranging from steel to cement to ceramics to whatever have started talking about cutting down production because government has said that we will give consumers a priority for LPG over industry.
Right.
And so there's a cascading effect that you see because of the gas shortages. Not just homeowners or domestic consumers that I think get the maximum headlines, but the less visible impact on industry and the less visible impact on fertilizers that you will see coming down in the next few weeks. It's almost inevitable. And that's why we should be really angry and upset with the Israelis and the Americans for having started this war, because from being in that Goldilocks position that the governor of RBI and the finance minister used to keep talking about until a few weeks back, today we are facing real challenges.
No, you're absolutely right. And just because one has prioritized the domestic consumers essentially deprioritized larger consumers, still has its nuances and complications. Like, for example, university hostels and accommodations, which rely on a large kitchen, have been bracketed under the same as an industrial consumer. But these are kids in government government colleges, universities. So they are impacted equally as an industrial consumer. So it is impacting the common people even as the government tries to prioritize the domestic consumer. Here I want to bring in India's diplomatic position. You've been a career diplomat, and tell us this evolution of India's position in the initial days and initial week. We saw India criticizing Iran for attacking the Gulf partners, the GCC countries, and not a word on the attacks by US and Israel. And belatedly, it has had conversations with the Iranian president, although the Iranian foreign minister has been in contact with our foreign minister, 4 conversations so far. What do you make of India's diplomatic position?
Look, I think, firstly, a situation like this, a crisis like this, is a real test for any diplomatic service. We, in this situation, are trying to balance. We are trying to square the circle with 4 corners, which are the US and Israel, and Iran, and the Gulf states. And we have close relationships with all of them. Now, in this particular case, I think what has perhaps affected us negatively is the tilt that we have demonstrated towards Israel over the last several years. It is reflected in our UN voting patterns, etc. And I think the optics of the Prime Minister being in Israel on the eve of the attacks on 26th of February, right?
40 hours before the attacks.
Right. So the optics of that, I think, again, sent their own message. And then that's compounded by the delay in both condolences on Khamenei's death and in criticizing the Iranian aggression against the Gulf states, but not saying anything about the US or Israeli aggression against Iran. And I think, the government is trying to keep all its channels open. Foreign Minister has spoken 3 times. Dr. Jaishankar has spoken 3 times with his counterpart. We seem to have had some success in getting a couple of tankers of LNG across into India. But it's one of those really tough situations of balancing hardcore national interest with principles and morality. And I think in this particular case, as usually happens in politics, national interest takes precedence over principle. And you're beginning to see that play out quite openly. Now, some people might say it reflects the growth of India, the maturing of India, that we are no longer moralizing to others. We are being pragmatic in terms of pursuing our own national interests. You may have others who say that we were better respected when we were seen as pursuing our strategic autonomy through principled positions. And I think those debates will remain open for some time because there is merit in either position. And I think if you are a practitioner of diplomacy today, you'll find that there weren't any easy answers available, except perhaps, perhaps we could have maintained a degree of balance vis-a-vis Israel. But I think that has had a disproportionate impact. I don't have a problem with us criticizing Iran's aggression against UAE or others, or Prime Minister Modi speaking twice with Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, because we have 4 million plus Indians there. We are concerned about their welfare. We are, and we have an exceptionally close relationship with UAE. So I don't have a problem with that, but it could have been balanced better, in my opinion.
Do you feel, just let me press you on this. Do you feel the Prime Minister's visit to Israel could have been, rethought?
Yeah. I think that since we all knew that there was a crisis building up, I think anybody in the business knew that something could happen at any time. We were all hoping that the negotiations would succeed. But at the same time, the military buildup was clearly pointing in that direction. So, but you always say hindsight is 2020, and you make decisions on the basis of the situation as you perceive it at that point of time.
Right. Before I move to the audience questions, I know there are a lot of questions. The last question is on the President Trump and options before him. Can he end the war? Does he have an off-ramp? What are his options? But he's the only person, it seems, who can call it off.
So, Shubhajit, by any objective criteria, the US is in a real bind. They chose to start this war. They didn't define a clear objective. They allowed themselves to an extent to be led by Israel into it. And today, they have no good choices available to them because either on day one, they could have said that we've decapitated the regime and we are leaving, or where they are heading today. I think where it is going today, unfortunately, is towards greater escalation. And you keep seeing these reports about Marines being on the way, plans to take over Kharg Island, boots on the ground, special forces going in to take the enriched uranium out, etc., etc. And all of those are bad ideas. So I'm saying that in an objective word, the US is badly stuck, but President Trump does not meet any normal standards of objective behavior. And so it is very much possible for him to wake up tomorrow and say that I'm declaring victory and going back. He can, because he is one of the only leaders who can say two mutually contradictory things within the space of 24 hours and get away with it. But even then, I think, Shubhajit, the key point here, when you talk of off-ramp, it isn't just the US which needs an off-ramp, but it is whether Iran is willing and ready to provide an off-ramp. So I think we are today at that stage where even if tomorrow President Trump wakes up and says, bye-bye, we won, we are going back, the Iranians may say that we also have a veto on this. We also have a perspective on this. And I think, Shubhajit, I'll just make that final point that from an Iranian perspective, they have suffered in 24, they have suffered in 25, they have suffered in 26. They see a pattern of Israel restocking, replenishing, coming back, striking it at will. And they want to break that pattern. Today, they feel that by blocking the Strait of Hormuz or by threatening to block, they haven't even physically blocked it yet, generally by threatening to block the Strait of Hormuz, they have a stranglehold on the global economy. They want to increase the cost. They want a global economic mayhem that will force tomorrow, if a Trump or a Netanyahu again wants to do this, it will force people to rework the calculations because there are real costs that are associated for the global economy with the 2026 episode that were missing in 24 and 25. And so the Iranians may decide to continue a bit longer with where they are and try to obtain some kind of a guarantee that this does not get repeated. So just we'll have to watch that space for a while to see what happens.
Right. So I'll move to the questions. The first question is from Mr. Gurpreet Singh. Mr. Gurpreet Singh, if you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Unmuted, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, Paji Navdeep, nice seeing you here and hearing what you said. Now, the question that I posed when I registered was, you answered it to some extent, but like a diplomat, a little diplomatically, on the pragmatism. The main thing was the stance of India has been totally baffling. Like you said, morality may not always trump, pragmatism in that sense. But not calling a spade a spade. I mean, we are from Punjab, and we believe in human rights trumps all, in that sense. And what we all have followed, Baba Nanak saying, Vele da sach.
If you could just please ask your question, please.
Yeah. So my only thing was that India should have come out openly and criticize the attack on Iran, not only, talked about the 9 million that we have in the UAE and the GCC states, but you also have people who are studying in Iran. Now we are trying to get them back. So that criticism of the attack on Iran, what the ambassador said in the early part was that it was a totally illegal war. Why was this not understood? The question was that it is baffling India's silence on the killing of the 165 schoolgirls, on the torpedoing of a frigate that came to your waters to take part in an exercise, on the killing of a head of state. So why was India keeping quiet? It took them 5 days to go and sign the condolence register at the Iranian embassy. I mean, that is the baffling part of it.
Okay, so basically your question is about why did India keep silent for so long and did not speak out? Is that right?
Yeah. Okay. Shubhajit, I'll try to answer it very briefly. I do not claim, sitting in Amritsar, to have any special insight into the minds of those who are actually making foreign policy at this juncture. I can, however, speculate, having been in positions, that somewhere in our calculus is the exceptional relationship that we have had with Israel. It is definitely in our calculus that Israel has stood by us from Kargil onwards, right up to Operation Sindoor. It has been perhaps the most forthcoming country when it comes to our intelligence requirements, our hardware requirements, and technology, and so on. Even stuff that we couldn't get anywhere else, we've accessed it from Israel. In addition, of course, it has those 41 centers of excellence which are helping with agriculture and drip irrigation and water conservation and all of those things. So it is a very close relationship. And I think, there's a feeling in Delhi when they take decisions that this is not a relationship that we want to forsake at times when you have situations with Pakistan, potentially with China in a very unstable neighborhood, that this is a country that you want to keep on your right side. It is not neat, it is not elegant, it is not ideal, but they are seasoned professionals who make foreign policy, and what comes out may not be pretty, but if it serves the national interest, then I'll go with it, because at the end of the day, as professionals, that's our job. On Gurpreet's point, this is not about Guru Nanak and his principles. It's about protecting the country's national interests.
Right. There's a very interesting question in the chat box from Ravinder Singh Robin, who asks, can Iran sustain a long full-scale war, or will it rely on prolonging a limited or proxy conflict? And the second question is, is the United Nations still effective in maintaining global peace, or is it becoming a powerless observer in major conflicts like those in West Asia?
So the sense is that Iran can continue for a considerable amount of time with this asymmetric warfare. It might come down to who has a higher threshold for pain. It's a very asymmetric threshold also. On one hand, Iran is being bombed day in and day out. 5,000 pounders are being dropped by the Americans now. And on the other hand, you have gas prices approaching $4 per gallon in America, and midterm elections. And as one of our friends remarked, it'll come down to three elements: munitions, markets, and midterms. And if those three are going to be your determinants in America on how long America can continue, my hunch at this point is that Iran can outlast in an asymmetric situation, simply because for them it is an existential struggle. For America, it's a choice of when it comes in and when it goes out. And when your back's to the wall and you are fighting for your survival, you'll probably go much further than the other. On the UN, well, I completely agree. The UN is an absolute bystander. Yes, you've got the UN Secretary General criticizing the attack and calling it illegal, which is about the same as me calling it illegal, because who's listening? And I think one of the tragedies of particularly this Trump administration is that international law has been given a complete kick and pushed aside. And you are very openly in a situation where American leaders, Trump downwards, but Pete Hegseth and others, are openly talking about a might is right kind of environment. And that's where we are today. So the UN is toothless.
Right. The next question is from Mr. Srirang Joshi.
Before we go to the next question, I would request all those who are asking questions to be very precise to the point, because we have already crossed the time and we have a lot of questions. Yeah. And in case you have two questions, pick the best one, ask that question, and if time permits, we'll come to the second question.
So thank you, Manas.
Yeah. Sure, Manas sir. First of all, I would like to thank Navdeep sir and Shubhajit sir for such a great interaction. So I actually had two questions, but the question I wanted to ask is, has President Trump really gambled on this war? I mean, had he not thought of this stretching this much, as Russia is seemingly the most benefiting country from this war? Thank you.
Yeah, it does seem that way, that there's been a major miscalculation by Trump and by the U.S. administration. I think the blame game is starting in Washington about who said what and who was responsible for what. Yesterday, you had hearings at the Senate Intelligence Committee where some of the hard questions were being asked, both in an open session and later in a closed door session that when Shubhajit and I knew 2.5 years back when we were talking that the Strait of Hormuz is a choke point that could be closed, then why didn't the Americans plan for it? And second, the hypocrisy of the American position has never been perhaps as badly exposed if you look at it from an Indian perspective, that look at the months that they spent criticizing India's purchases of Russian oil. And almost blaming us for financing the Russian war effort through our oil purchases, only to now not only do this so-called sanction waiver or allow us to buy Russian oil, but enable Russia to benefit to the tune of $150 million a day, according to one Financial Times estimate, from the higher prices that it is getting for its oil. So yeah, I think it's almost like the right hand not knowing what the left is doing. But Russia is certainly the principal beneficiary, but so is China in many ways.
Right. Next question is from Shivam Mishra.
Good evening, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. My question is that now they have started hitting each other's gas and oil infra. This crisis is going to become more and more severe. So, what is our way out of it if, let's say, the war goes on for another 2 months? And second question, is this calculated and measured silence which the government is taking, is it not jeopardizing the well-being of the people due to this gas and oil crisis?
Look, the silence is not on the gas crisis. I think we know what we are coming to. I think maybe the government doesn't want to create a sense of panic. You have a very capable Minister for Petroleum and Natural Gas, who's a former diplomat and has very good relationships across the oil industry in the world. And I'm sure he's working the phones to try and get India every bit of oil and gas that we can get in the coming shortages that we foresee. I hope we don't get to a situation, but remember, we are not alone in this. In Thailand, they are doing a 4-day week. In Bangladesh and Pakistan, they are already saying that schools can go online. The belt tightening that might happen will be a consequence. And I think we may I don't rule out a possibility where a few weeks down the road, we also start working actively on some conservation measures to reduce the demand until the supply catches up with demand. And that would be probably the pragmatic thing to do, because let's be clear that, maybe with hindsight, we can say that we should have built larger strategic petroleum reserves and larger gas reserves. But we are where we are today. And in that situation, you can only do two things. You can try to increase supply by using our goodwill and relationships across the hydrocarbons world to secure more for ourselves. And keep in mind that, we are competing with others. Taiwan is so dependent that they are saying another week of shortages, and they may not be enough to supply their semiconductors industry. And the other side is to manage demand. And I think right now you're seeing just the first steps of reducing gas to industry and making sure that the households are not inconvenienced. But you might see more steps coming up if this conflict continues.
Right. Suri, there's a very interesting question in the chat box. I mean, Aryansh, a St. Stephen's College student, asks, with the uncertainty of war and how events in the past have unfolded, like in World War II and World War I, do you identify any similar elements that suggest that this is a start of something more consequential, more impactful? Do you see that? It's a very interesting question.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think that the bigger trend probably that you're beginning to see, I think you might start, when you look back at this period of history, you might see 2025 as the beginning of the decline of American power. Thanks to all of the high-handed actions of President Trump, be it his statements about Canada as the 51st state or Greenland or his open sort of contempt for Europe and the European economic and political model to whatever else. So on one hand, you're beginning to see, I think, you've already seen clearly the decline of American soft power when it decided to close USAID and a whole lot of other walk out of climate change negotiations, etc. But you might also start seeing the decline of America in a larger sense. And at the same time, even their anti-immigration policies, etc., are likely to contribute to that decline because immigrants have been such a crucial part of the American success story. Balanced by not just the rise of China, which seems inexorable, but also hopefully the rise of other middle powers that you will see come with a greater voice on the global scene, not just India, but potentially Brazil, potentially Indonesia, Poland, others. And certainly, you're already beginning to see a rearmament of Europe after years of complacency. So I think we are at a point of time where major churning is happening in the geopolitical order. And to that extent, yes, you could see that maybe look back 10 years later and say that 2025 was when it really started. The unraveling of the US and the rebalancing of equations in the world.
Okay. The next question is from Madhavi Chaudhary.
Good evening, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. My question is, how should India balance its strategic partnerships, energy interests in the Middle East while responding to current conflict? And what strategic steps can prevent the conflict from expanding? Thank you.
We are trying to balance our strategic interests, except that, perhaps the only thing that we could do constructively at this stage is work with other like-minded countries to build a coalition of those who can act as credible mediators in the conflict. Because we are now an affected party by the conflict. And I think you might have seen reports that Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar had gone to Brussels for a meeting with the European foreign ministers. They are obviously equally concerned with the current situation. And I think if you could potentially see a situation where large countries like India or France or Turkey, who are concerned with the current situation, are able to come together with the ability to talk to the Iranians, to the Americans, to the Israelis, to the Gulf states. Because remember, these are the four actors. These are the that you have to try and bring on the same page. I think personally, it is in India's interest to take a very proactive role in even if it's behind the scenes, but a proactive approach to try to bring this conflict to an early conclusion, because we cannot afford to be bystanders. We are getting hurt in this process.
Right. I'm going to club a few questions, and because we are running short of time, we have a lot of in queue. Abhinav Shah, if you could ask your question, and then I'll ask for Mr. Nitesh Jadhav. Abhinav Shah, first, please.
Hello. Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello.
Please.
Good, sir. Good evening, sir. It was a really nice talk. My question is regarding the question I gave was partly addressed, but I'm having a one more query regarding have our diplomats in the South Bloc not reacted to our energy needs as they should have? Because when you say the PM went to Israel before just before the war, can't they foretell the war is going to happen and we should stay at an arm's length?
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Got it. The second question is from Nitesh Jadhav. Nitesh Jadhav, please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Good evening, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is regarding the supply chain disruption. Means currently I am into specialty chemical sales, and currently we are facing very issue regarding RM supply, raw material supply. So question is means how much time it will take to get this normalized? The disruption will get normalized even if the war gets stops tomorrow. So can you throw some light on that?
Yeah.
So on the first question, I am not privy to what advice our colleagues in Delhi would have given to the Prime Minister. But as professionals, I can tell you that we would have given our opinions, but sometimes decisions can also be taken at a political level. It is not necessary that the advice of diplomats is always accepted as it is. But having said that, I have no inside knowledge at this point of time on what was the factor behind that, behind the timing of the visit. On supply chains, Nitish, unfortunately, I would be making plans B and C and anticipating that this disruption could continue for a considerable period. As I said, my reason for saying this is you are seeing shutdowns of refining capacity in the Gulf. You've seen it in Qatar, in Saudi, 20% of the capacity has already been taken off line. In Abu Dhabi, in Iraq, there is no storage left. Country after country is showing that there's no option but to reduce. So you are looking at two different problems here. One is the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, so nothing is coming out, but also the reduction in production capacity that is happening because there's no room to store it anywhere. And so because of that, even if the war were to end, say, in a week's time, hopefully, or 2 weeks' time, it would still take several more weeks and potentially several months before supply chains can get around to a degree of normalcy. Refining will have to come on board, and then you will have this huge logjam of container ships and tankers and all of that. The goods are at one place and the ships are at another place and so on. So regrettably, this is not going to ease up very soon.
Right. The next two questions are from Ankur Kumar and Soumya Madhava. Ankur Kumar, please go first. Unmute yourself. Ankur Kumar.
Hello, good evening, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
Good evening, sir. My question is, as India is leading the BRICS summit this year, how can it navigate the internal contradictions among internal members? Whether in BRICS we have members countries like Iran and UAE.
Yeah.
Who are directly involved against each other in this current conflict. So how can we manage the situation and prove our diplomacy, sir?
Sure. Thank you. Next question is from Soumya Madhava. Soumya Madhava, if you could unmute yourself. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Good evening, Suri sir. Good evening, Roy sir. Thank you for your session. So my question was from the point of view of GCC countries. They are actually facing a dilemma because they are facing Iran, which is also their brother nation, Islam nation, brotherhood, fraternities, equally important, but it is becoming a threat for them also. So how can they actually, take it as in a balanced way without hurting their beliefs as well as, their safety? Thank you.
Okay, on BRICS, I think it's going to be a challenge for us. Obviously, the Gulf countries, you have UAE, you have Saudi Arabia on one side, you have Iran on the other. And beyond that also, you will see other fissures in the BRICS agenda. I can only say that we very successfully managed to navigate similar-ish challenges during our chairmanship of G20. when everybody thought it would be impossible to bridge the Russia-Ukraine divide. But somehow, I think with a bit of dexterity, with a bit of flexibility, we were able to come up with language that satisfied all sides. It wasn't perfect, and I think you might see something similar emerge in the BRICS framework. There's still time to go, and I'm sure people will be working on it. Soumya, on your point, look, I don't think religion is a significant factor in what's happening right now. After all, these are countries fighting during the holy month of Ramadan. It's Eid today. I haven't seen anything ease up. And so I think, countries are fighting in terms of their national interests. Beyond that, there is also the Shia-Sunni divide, and the Gulf countries are all mostly Sunni, and Iran is, of course, 90% Shia. But I don't think Islam is a factor in this conflict, except to say that you keep hearing, oh, how terrible that we are fighting during the holy month of Ramadan.
I'll end the session, but before that, I want to take a few questions from the chat box because we have completely run out of time. I'll just, first question is Swarit Rao, who's asking, is the current conflict reshaping the Middle East power balance in a lasting way, similar to past watershed moments? The other question is from Araman Dave, who asks, has Dubai lost its sheen as an oasis for the rich and the wealthy, because of the current instability and the notion of safety and security that has been breached? And one question from another questioner, which I saw, was about these within Iran. Does this particular? I think we did answer. You did answer it, but there was a question about whether this particular situation strengthens the regime or it weakens the regime. These three questions, if you could answer.
Okay, and these are the last ones, right? I also have to go.
Yeah.
Reshaping the Middle East, I think the US and Israel, and particularly Israel, certainly want to reshape the Middle East. And in that reshaping of the Middle East, they would love to see a more pliant Iran. As of now, I don't see it happening. But if the Iranian government is able to withstand the onslaught, as they have been for the last 3 weeks, that may not work. And you may see the emergence of some clumsy alliances, which are more of convenience than of anything else, like you saw the emergence of the Saudi-Pakistani deal, which I felt that wasn't worth very much, but it got a lot of attention anyway. So I don't see any major reshaping unless there's a collapse of the Iranian regime. Let me just leave it at that. On Dubai, I would say that yes, the sheen of Dubai has taken a knock, but having observed the place very closely and lived in Abu Dhabi for 3 years, I would say that don't write off Dubai, don't bet against it. It has repeatedly, during the 2008 Lehman Brothers crisis, there was a financial collapse and people were willing to write off Dubai, and it found a way to reinvent itself. So multiple times over the last 3 decades, it has shown that ability to reinvent. And I think that once things settle down, capital may be a little bit more cautious. But remember that as things have gone south over the last 3 weeks, there will also be a reconstruction happening. There will be other opportunities happening, and you might see the place bounce back. On Iran regime, I definitely see it in a weaker position. It is fighting for its survival. And if it survives, it will still be scarred by the loss of major leaders, and also by being more isolated than it was at the start of this conflict. And that is because the decision of the Iranian government to lash out at its Gulf neighbors may be a tactical necessity, but it could be a strategic blunder. Because these are the countries which could potentially have been investors into Iran's prosperity, and that is being jeopardized by some of the recent actions.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Suri, for this time. We are way past out of time, and always enriching, insightful, and very prescient. I'm sure we'll have many more such conversations. And after this, do follow our reporting, coverage, analysis at the Indian Express, including this particular session. I would ask my colleague Manas to close the session.
Thank you so much. It was we were all expecting a lot of questions on this, and so I'm sorry we've not been able to take all of them, but most of them were already answered by the conversation was going on. Really enriching conversation between Shubhajit and Navdeep Suri sir. So war may begin in one region, but its consequences really stay there. And your explanation, your conversation, and the questions reflect that reality. Thank you so much. We'll keep tracking the war. And as Shubhajit said, that Navdeep sir has been a real gem for us to explain such issues. We'll get back to you when there are more issues on this. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Shubhajit, and thank you, dear viewers. We'll be back again with new topic. Bye.
Thank you.
Record